much for taking the time to be with us today. We're very excited to have all of you here and see many familiar faces in the audience. We're going to wait for 5 minutes for some more people to join. In that time, I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, put your name, the organization you come from, and where in the world you're joining us from. We're excited to have people from all over the world joining us today. And we're just going to play some music, so just sit back and relax, and we'll start in the next 5 minutes. Welcome everyone. Thank you once again for being with us today. I invite you all to introduce yourself in the chat. I'm very, very excited and honored to be here today with Robyn Whittaker and Geoffrey Mamputa. They are both very accomplished in their fields, and I think it's going to be a fascinating presentations and discussions. So welcome, and over to you, Robyn.
Thank you, Jenna-Lee, and just such a joy to be in the space with you and Geoff again. So we had the most wonderful prep discussion on Friday, and I think we could have sat and spoken for another 3 or 4 hours with a huge amount of pleasure. So it's really, really nice to be here, and also to be with everybody that's listening in. And it's so good to see some familiar names, and familiar names from both of the particular spaces that I want to just share about today. So what would be wonderful is if those who are joining us would just pop their thoughts into the chat. I know that we are all 3 of us in this sort of presentation room are really great believers in the power of generative dialogue. And I think in this form, just having those voices coming through in the chat would be so incredible. And we really look forward to hearing from you all. So please do, even though your physical voice might not be here, please bring your voice into the chat. And so today I just want to share a little bit, and what the invitation was to share a little bit about was this concept of co-creating in complexity, and how critically important it is to create spaces of care and belonging, that actually care and belonging give us this incredible sense of resilience and capacity to cope with the complexity that we face as human beings. And while that might sound obvious, and it kind of is obvious, this bizarre phenomenon that we experience, that actually is quite a rare experience, to feel supported in a collective where there is huge attention paid to the quality of the relationships that are present in that collective. So we may all experience this at a micro level in family and, with friends, etc. But actually at a societal level, we're not really as conscious of the need to pay attention for the conditions of how we are being together, and just what the consequences of that are, and also how it's possible for us to invert that, to change that around. And so today I have a few slides, which I probably will abandon halfway through, but I really did want to share a little bit of the experience that we as a number of different collectives have had with experimenting with, so can we do this? Can we actually very intentionally create these spaces together that allow us to become co-creative, that allow us to collaborate more effectively, that allow us to stop emphasizing the work that we are doing and rather emphasize how we are being together while we are doing the things that we collectively care about? And how do we pay attention in the way that allows us to de-emphasize outcomes and to really emphasize the core of our choices of how we are being together and how we are holding each other in communities of care and belonging, and how that enables us to navigate complexity. So maybe just a very brief little bit of background. So I come from a fairly eclectic background, but what I'm really have been extremely interested in, I think for most of my whole life, but particularly in the past decade, has been to understand what are the kinds of conditions that actually enable us to thrive together. And as often happens, I've come to that from the perspective of getting really frustrated by seeing all of the potential that would be possible if we were able to work more effectively together, and yet encountering over and over again this reality that it seems to be extremely hard for people to work collaboratively, that, we keep trying projects and then having issues with those projects, and then for the experience to actually become disappointing, and for us to become a little disillusioned by the experience of working collectively, collaboratively, of trying to be co-creative together. And I've really wanted to understand, why is it so hard? And so I spent about a decade, but particularly in the last 5 to 6 years, really trying to understand the how. So what is it about the how of how we are trying to do this work together that's making it so hard for us to actually get there. And I did a lot of, I've worked in a lot of different kinds of spaces, and I've done a lot of different sort of learning, had a lot of different learning experiences that I've really trained. I've gone and tried to explore what are all the systems change models, what are the design theories, what are the spaces that help us with understanding how community works. And there are many. And this, I think, is part of the journey that's been so exciting, is to discover quite how many spaces are experimenting with this fundamental piece around how are we being together? How are we choosing to be together? What are the ways that we can humanize our spaces more? And what difference does that make in the world? Because I think, we tend to have this thought that, oh, the system doesn't serve us, or we don't do this well. Whereas actually, perhaps there is an alternative narrative, which is that maybe our experience has been a pivot to help us increasingly in the times that we are in, try to discover a different way of being in the world that might lead to outcomes that are much better for us than the ones we're currently experiencing. And so at the end of the day, all of that work has really led me to a point of, I really want to understand not the theory, the practice, like practically, can we do this? And how do we do this? And so, can we get a few people that would really be willing to undertake this journey to try out a different way of being? And at its foundation, what that would mean would be voluntarily stepping into an experiment that asks us to replace all of the organizing principles that we consciously or unconsciously operate according to in our society. Our need for certainty, knowing that we're going to get a specific outcome. How do we control for that? How do we manage for that? How do we manage other people for that? So voluntarily replacing that system of certainty, judgment, and fear, which is a lot of what modernity is actually focused on or based upon, control, making sure that we get to what we need. How do we voluntarily replace that with a system that foregrounds curiosity, compassion, and love, and actually relinquishes control and looks at the conditions without needing to predicate exactly what comes out from the way we are being together collectively? What might happen if we did that? And so I'm going to share just two of these experiments, and I'll try and make it quite quick. So the first is something that two colleagues and I co-founded about coming up for 5 years ago now, called Africa Voices Dialogue. It's a pan-continental initiative. And my colleagues, Andrew Wambua from Kenya and Abdelaziz Suri from Morocco, really thought together simultaneously almost, had this experience where we'd met. I won't go into the details, but we'd met and we each connected within the space of a week to say we really feel that there needs to be more space for people who care about learning on our continent to connect. We are so separated. How do we go about doing that? And so we literally said, well, let's just try and start something. And we entered into this experiment with only one objective. And it was very, very explicit. And it has remained very explicit for us. And it's a core foundation of actually what we do in Africa Voices Dialogue. And that is to hold a space where the voices of Africa's educators, learners, community members, policymakers, anybody who cares about human development, learning, and thriving on the continent can be seen, heard, and loved. And we articulate that as our NIA. So NIA, and on this slide, on this slide, it actually has fallen off the one side as we transferred across. But our NIA is very explicit. And NIA is an Arabic and Swahili word, which means the deepest intention of our being. And it is to co-create spaces of belonging. And that is the only thing that we try and do in this space. So I'm going to just go through that. And I want to just share this image, which is an image that spontaneously was shared with us after about 2 years of running Africa Voices Dialogue from one of our partners in the Nakibale refugee camp. He runs Umucho Art, which is an incredible arts project in that space. And he shared with us this representation of how he experienced Africa Voices Dialogue. And it is just so meaningful for us because without our necessarily being explicit around the process that we use, which is a process of generative dialogue. It is an asset-based community development approach, but it is hugely focused on connection, care, and belonging first and foremost. This is the image that came through. And it really, for me, speaks to this ability to cope with complexity and the complexity of our continent through a community of care and belonging, and that really welcomes and recognizes diverse voice and lived experience. The second experiment has been, there are a number of people on the call from this space, has been very specifically, it started about the same time in South Africa, and it's been a very specific experiment to see what would it take for us from the extremely diverse number of people and stakeholders. We have an extremely complex system of not-for-profit civil society organizations, business organizations, funders, government, etc., who are interested in learning in South Africa. And yet it's been my experience, and this is a lot of what this work is born out of, was that it seems to be so hard to coordinate these activities. And so in our South African context, we have for the past 4 years also been experimenting with, so what would it take to build the kinds of strong relational ecosystem capabilities within South Africa that would allow us to actually grow a learning ecosystem and to grow a system where people are in meaningful relationship with each other in the long term for the sake of the country and its learning spaces. And also, you know, the foundation for that is, how do we foster these conditions for relational, connected, functional learning ecosystem? So I'd love for those couple of members that are in the room who've been part of that for a few years to maybe just drop a note on what the experience has been like. Probably the most powerful thing in this experience, we've done a lot together, and it's been 120 people over time, and those 120 people don't necessarily always show up all the time in everything that we run. But what we have been very, very intentional about is being consistent, congruent, and continuous in holding that space, and in holding the space in a way that helps us be in relationship, support each other, connect, care for each other. And it's had some really beautiful outcomes. So I'm going to skip through the next few slides. Actually, let me go back to this one because I think it's quite foundational. That in the same way as our Africa Voices dialogue space, we've had a really clear intent. So we've been very clear with our EdEco Connect space around how do we want to hold the space. Firstly, it's invitational. We want it to be inspirational. We want it to have an enormous sense of agency and ownership. And so we co-create this together. We want it to be a space that motivates, helps us co-create, but is also intensely humanizing. And I think that this is the fundamental, like being intentional about creating spaces that both humanize and are humanizing and offer us the opportunity to practice that way of being in the world. And that's really been the emphasis of this work. I'll skip through the next few because I think I'm out of time. So please forgive me for that. All right. What I'd love to share here is just, so these two slides. So it's been 4 years. If you looked at it, you know, everybody has been hugely into this ecosystem mapping. Okay, so for me, this does not do it. All right, this is kind of what's there in our EdEco Connect space. We've got this beautiful kind of web of connections. It's fractal, so it's not everybody. There's thousands of people in the system, but it's kind of offering a way of experiencing the system together that's quite different from how it's experienced in so many other spaces. So that's what it looks like at a sort of technical level. But what it actually looks like is this. It's human. It's really, really human. And it's about experiencing spaces where we see, hear, and love each other. And that's more important than anything we might do together. So I think I'm going to stop the slides here because my time is up. There are a whole host more. But what I really would like to speak to in this last maybe minute is the fact that there actually are a lot of different spaces doing work in this way it doesn't matter that they have to be done in identically the same way. What really matters, I think, are really two things only. The one is the clarity of the intent and our congruence, our keeping ourselves as individuals clear on our near. What is our reason for being? What is the highest purpose for our being? What is that individually? And then how do we actually collectively, stepping into the concept of Ubuntu, how do we see that in each other, hold that in each other, and support it in each other? And how do we increasingly grow our collective sense of how we want to be in the world and become brave enough to step out of the fear that holds us apart from each other and practice being increasingly vulnerable and open with each other and being in the world the way that we would like to have this world experienced. It sounds simple, and a lot of people talk about this as a soft work. It's not soft work. It's very, very difficult because it requires so much vulnerability and so much letting go of these ingrained concepts of how things work. And yet, when we do hold things this way, when we hold this clarity of intent, and then the second thing is learning how to pay exquisite attention, learning how to really pay attention to each other in ways that see the other human being and what we are trying to do, that see the world around us and what it needs, that see the system that we're part of and what it is that's wanting to emerge through it. When these two things are present, a clarity of intent and high quality, exquisite attention, and we're brave enough to practice them, even in the moments where we feel uncomfortable, it's incredible. Having been on this journey is actually incredible what emerges as a result. And it's really very exciting as well. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to you, Geoff, because I'd really love to hear the resonance from your experience on this kind of work.
Robyn, thank you very much. And welcome everybody who's here. And we see some old faces, people we've met in the past, but I've got to mention Wilma. We've had some very interesting conversations with her. And she's the kind of person who works in the space that you mentioned, Robyn. What I'd like to look at in response to some of the questions that you are raising, Robyn. When you say, what is our reason for being? And then I'll add to that and say, why do we do the kind of work we do when we've got the kind of challenges that we're talking about? Why do we continue? Why do we have people who've been in this sector for 50, 60 years and all their lives? They are there because of love. They love what they do. They love the communities that they work with. They love seeing other people growing and developing and blooming and blossoming and realizing their potential. That's what they love. And the kind of love that we're talking about in this sector is mostly driven by compassion, driven by care of others. And it fosters self-love and the development of others. And then on the other hand, we work with partners and other stakeholders in the field that we work. I'm trying to respond to some of the challenges that you're raising. You put it so beautifully from the other side. And some of the biggest stakeholders and partners that enable us to do the kind of work that we do is what we call the philanthropy sector. I'll call them a sector for now. And what drives those people in that sector? Some people think that they're only driven because they've got big money. Money on its own is not a driver for development, for care, or for growth. It's not. However, philanthropy, in our understanding, is about sharing of your time and your resources. It may be finance, it may be other resources that you bring. Philanthropy, for me, as we have seen in many of our communities, especially on the continent here and in other continents, people volunteering because they love what they're doing, because they love their communities. Philanthropy is about engaging with people and not doing things for people, but working with those communities, those countries, those societies that you're working with. So one finds that love and philanthropy come together. And then you say, what prohibits us from not being able to realize this working together, this co-creation, as you mentioned? Usually it's because if you can go back just one slide, Jenna, if you don't mind. It's because some of these things, what I call the interaction of the two, is sometimes missing in how we work. You love, fine, but sometimes is the empathy there, or are we just doing our work? And I hope you don't mind. That's KID. It's kindness and kinship. Kinship, not in the cultural sense where I'm related to you. It's kinship in the sense that I am related to you in the situation that we're in and in the situation that we are trying to address together. That's the kind of kinship that we're talking about. You put it so beautifully when you say co-creation and co-learning. There's the kind of kinship that we're talking about. The sense of selflessness and the sense of community and the sense of nurturing. Sometimes those things we do at a personal level, but not in the work that we do. And then it presents us with the kind of challenges that you raised, Robyn, earlier on. Thanks, Jenna. And then where these two intersect, just a few examples of where love, philanthropy, and development meet. We've seen it when it comes to disaster management. These are the kind of big issues that we're talking about. When we talk about education and funding environmental conservation, I mean, we've seen people when the Amazon forest is burning, we all come together and we want to be seen there. When there's disaster relief in the floods, and we bring these resources together, and the best of organizations and the best of individuals and the best of people emerges in those situations. But we never call it philanthropy, we call it love. When we're doing those things, we do them out of love. And Jenna, I've got a slide thing. The slide thing is blocking the slides themselves. The thing that says next slide. Okay, all right, that's fine if you can't remove it. But one of the biggest challenges is what is the nature of this relationship between philanthropy, the love that we bring, and development, is that most of the time this relationship is unequal. Not only between the communities and those that provide assistance or help or co-creation. It is the manner in which it is conceived. Most of the time, it is conceived in the form of help. And where I come from, I'll have to be selfish here as somebody who comes from this continent. The continent does not need help as such. The continent does not know help as such. The continent knows working together and sharing of what you have. When you work with somebody in a situation, one does not work from a point of surplus. One works from a point of sharing and giving of what you have and drawing of yourself, not of handing out. That then affects the kind of relationship that we have, that actually stifles, Robyn, as you said earlier on, co-learning, co-creation, because one is more powerful than the other person. The other thing is those people that we work with, as you say, in African Voices, in African Dialogue, for instance, one of the things that we say, are the people that we work with, are they heard? Or most of the time, are they imposed upon? Do we impose help? Do we impose assistance on the communities that we work with? Or do we create space for us to learn from them? Jenna will talk to us later about the Tales of Turning approach, which is premised on the fact that the communities that we work with and the people that we work with know their situation better than we do. And the best way that we can work and assist and facilitate is by listening and learning from them. That makes our work easier. But Jenna will go into much more detail about that. We are merely there as facilitators. We are not saviors. No. That stifles co-learning, that stifles co-creation. Because I would respect you because you've got more resources than I have, and I don't want to be in your bad books, as we put it in South Africa. And then at the end of the day, we complain about lack of sustainability. It is not sustainable because we did not learn from the other person. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Guri.
Thanks so much, Jeff. It's always wonderful listening to you. So thank you so much for sharing. And I can listen to you and Robyn for hours. So thank you for sharing. So my background is in psychology and narrative therapy and peace building. And narrative therapy is one of my biggest passions. So I'm excited to share a bit more with you today about it in relation to the topic. And this is the way that we work at Tales of Turning. So we take a narrative approach where communities are the experts of their own lives, and they have all the skills and knowledge to influence their own problems. And we facilitate processes both online and offline, where individuals and communities share their knowledge to create new narratives and to re-author their stories. In our daily lives, we have many different experiences every day, and we try to create meaning from these experiences. So the stories of our lives are created through certain events and us linking them together in sequence across time and then trying to make sense of it. And this meaning making becomes the plot of the story. And we have different stories about ourselves, our abilities, our communities, our relationships. And these start to shape and influence our lives. And the thread that weaves all these different events together becomes the narrative is the thread that weaves all these different events together. So the meaning that we attribute to events are not neutral in their effects on their lives. They shape our present moment, and they also shape our future. They shape our attitudes, our beliefs, how we interact, how we behave. And a single story with thin descriptions leaves little room for the complexities of life. It restricts people's expression of their own stories and unique knowledge, and it prevents them from feeling and being seen and heard. And dominant stories and these thin stories are often created by the people that are in power in a particular context. And these dominant stories start to have effects on our lives. So if they are negative stories, they start to affect the way that we create our identities, the way we see ourselves, the way we interact. They affect our work and our ideas about our abilities and what we are capable of. So they have far-reaching consequences. And these dominant stories, they make invisible the power dynamics and the injustices that people are facing. And they also make invisible people's unique abilities and knowledge and the alternative and different stories. So they kind of hide and obscure those alternative stories. So alternative stories are the events that don't fit in with the dominant story. they remain untold and unrecognized. And these exceptions to the dominant story are less visible. So what is an incredible method, and what we work with at Tales of Turning, is asking curious questions. So it really excited me when Robyn was talking about it earlier, this paying very close attention and really journeying with people and listening and asking these questions to understand more. And then this open up space for people to re-author their stories, and it creates space for change and for new possibilities. And as I alluded to earlier, it's really important to look at all of this and make visible, when we're talking about the stories we make of our lives, to make visible the power dynamics. So in the broader context that we are living in. So this includes power dynamics around gender, class, race, culture, age, and sexual identity. Another part of narrative therapy is documenting knowledge. So it's an incredible way of working when you're working with a group of people to document their unique knowledge and their unique abilities, and then to share it with other people and other communities. And social media is a great way of doing this. So an example of this is that we did gender-based violence prevention training with a group of community-based organizations. And as everyone knows on this call, community-based organizations and the individuals working there, they are really on the forefront of preventing gender-based violence and supporting survivors of gender-based violence. So the knowledge that they hold is truly extraordinary. So in the training, we worked with stories and weaving together the different community-based organizations' knowledge. And then we amplified this knowledge through social media and shared it with other South African communities and other communities across Africa and across the globe. And this really becomes something very exciting because it helps to amplify the incredible work that community-based organizations are already doing. And so on the screen is an example of social media content that we would create. And something that would stand out is that instead of using negative images, which reinforce the negative stories, we show what do we want to see in this world. So this one is about fatherhood, and you can see a father really positively interacting with his child. And the question we wanted to ask was around disrupting intergenerational cycles of violence. So instead of telling people, fathers, it's terrible, you need to be involved in your children's lives and don't hit your children, we ask questions to open up different stories and new possibilities. So this one is around what behaviors are you afraid of passing on to your child, to really open up the conversation and explore and go on this journey together. And now that's a very brief overview of narrative therapy and some of the things that excite me around narrative therapy. And I want to share how at Tales of Turning, we really get this depth through narrative therapy. And Jeff and Steph, who are the other directors of Tales of Turning, they're very experienced conflict mediators, which means you have to be highly skilled at creating spaces where people feel seen and heard. And you might not use the word love, but it is that. It's creating those spaces. So how do we create this depth using conflict mediation and narrative therapy, but then have a wide reach through using social media, because people are spending so much time on social media that it affects our behavior and our attitudes and our thoughts. So what has really interested me is keeping this depth, but using social media for scale and using these tools to understand better and to reach more people. So we use social media listening tools to analyze conversations on public social media. So it's pulling in big data from public social media. And then we do, and it's in near real time, and it's unfiltered data. Then we do a thematic analysis on it, and then you can see all the narratives that emerge. So how are people talking about different issues? How are they talking about fatherhood, about gender-based violence, about lobola, about climate change? And we can really get a deep understanding how people are grappling with these issues, and we can hear them and see their perspectives. And from that, we can find entry points to dialogue. It also allows us to use we use all different South African languages and all different languages across Africa, but also to use colloquial language to really meet people where they're at. And there's a lot of other ways we use these social media listening tools, but for the sake of time, I'm just keeping it related to what we're talking about. So that's the first thing. Like, we can really, I think Steph normally describes it as if you're sitting on a bus and you can overhear everyone's conversation. So it's really getting like this deep, deep understanding and listening to people, right? And then we use dialogue facilitation and also social media. So another example that I love of the work that we did was over election time, when we trained 37 community-based organizations in collaboration with SCAT to prevent violence and build peace during the elections. And we know that South Africa has this reputation for violence. And of course, we have to acknowledge that we do have violence. But again, to not only look at this dominant story, what qualities of South African communities promote peace building? And this is some of the conversations. We share this online and get more people involved and really listen to people's responses, which becomes really exciting. I also wanted to share another example of working with the taxi industry. And this was really an exciting work to me because the taxi industry has a reputation of being violent. And again, we have to acknowledge that there is violence in the taxi industry, but it's become a dominant story. So the approach that we took was the taxi industry is full of incredible businessmen and businesswomen, and taxi drivers are playing a crucial role in their communities. They are connecting families with each other. They're connecting people to employment opportunities, children to education. And so we approached it in this way. And and also they're used to working in a violence context, so they have unique knowledge of how to navigate violence. So when we approached it in this way and started exploring these alternative stories, it opened up the space for change and for new possibilities. And the taxi drivers started sharing how they feel isolated from their communities. They feel that they're not respected and that they don't belong. And they themselves shared that they don't think they have the communication skills to engage with the community in a different way. So we, in bite-sized pieces, provided them training in dialogue facilitation and different ways to communicate. And from that, it's really mobilized the taxi drivers, and they started engaging with the communities in different ways, expressing what they needed to feel respected. And from the group, champions emerged, and some of the taxi drivers decided to start campaigns and initiatives to prevent gender-based violence. So you see, when you open up different ways of talking and alternative stories, new possibilities emerge. We create content for social media around dialogue in different South African languages. So this was work around technology facilitated gender-based violence, asking questions. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to go very briefly into our dialogue facilitation methodology. But we've taken, as I mentioned, conflict mediation and narrative therapy and adapted it to an online environment. So we're experimenting how in online spaces we can ask curious questions to understand people's perspectives, make people feel included, and give people an opportunity to express how they're feeling. And then from that point, ask them questions to reflect on problematic beliefs that they may hold or attitudes around misogyny or racism or gender and all of this. So really to understand people first and then ask them questions to reflect. We have sessions where we invite other people to join us. So we're doing something around the national dialogue, which is very exciting. So I invite all of you to join these dialogue sessions. This is where we dialogue online together. So we actually do the work to increase impact. And then we also share knowledge with each other. At the end, I'm going to share our WhatsApp group where you can join, be part of the conversation there, and then also come to these digital dialogue sessions. And then I just wanted to share that these dialogue facilitation methodology that we've developed is evidence-based. Over the elections, we worked with the University of Washington, applying this methodology to question myths and disinformation. So just asking, is this true? Where did you get this information from? So again, we're not telling anyone what is true, what is not true. It's not our place to hold the truth. We are getting them to check in with themselves. What is their story? What are their values and beliefs? And does this match with that? And the study showed that it gets people, it prevents people from resharing misinformation. It gets people to question the accuracy of the post and the trustworthiness of the post. So basically, it gives them this moment just to think before they sharing harmful things online. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on narrative therapy in philanthropy. And this conversation, I think we're going to have to have another conversation between me, Geoff, and Robyn, and to go deeper into this, because it's really aligned with all of us. So philanthropists, community-based organizations, and individuals, they all have really incredible knowledge of how to form incredible relationships and how to do this work. And so when we look at these alternative stories, these different ways of doing philanthropy and community-based work, and really go into the unique knowledge and skills from all the different parts and amplify what's working and how we can do this through relationships, it really becomes something extraordinary. And then amplifying those knowledge, amplifying these different stories, and so documenting and sharing it, and also using hope-based narratives. So of course we need to acknowledge the problem, but also acknowledging the alternative stories, the different ways of being in the world, fathers who are doing things differently, people in education who are doing things differently, and it really becomes something very exciting. So we wanted to have a bit of a conversation between me, Robyn, and Geoff. I think there's limited time for it, but I think it would be lovely to have a bit of a reflection in the last few moments, and then perhaps in future we'll have like an actually conversational webinar, because our conversations have been amazing. But Robyn, I just wanted to ask you a question of what really has arisen for you when you've related to what you shared and listened to me and Geoff talking, like what resonates and what comes up for you.
Yeah, and I thank you so much, Jenna-Lee. I think it's what resonates again is the congruence in so many different spaces that is very foundational. It's a very foundational thing around how are we choosing to be together. There is choice here. There is a choice of remaining within a fear-based process of how I engage with others. I have a story. I choose not to be curious about that story. I reiterate that story, and therefore I create the outcomes that I don't want. Or I actually pause and become self-reflective and think about, well, how do I actually want it? What is my near? How do I want to be in this circumstance? And how can I very intentionally choose, first notice what is happening in me when I encounter the story. So that intimate personal level of, okay, what is happening in me? What is the space that I'm coming from? And then I have a choice. And the choice piece is so profound that in a moment where I can feel, so we use a lot of the theory U modeling as well, and also Karpman's got a beautiful model where he talks about, drama triangle versus empowerment triangle. And in the theory U model, the presencing versus the absencing. And that moment of choice is that moment that lies in each of us, where if we don't just act, but we take a moment to notice, I feel myself absencing. Oh, I feel myself becoming angry. I don't have to. How do I convert that into curiosity, compassion, and love? And love is important, because for me, it's the fundamental here. We have to notice, is the system that we are operating in, and is our choice around how we operate that in that fear-based or love-based? And it's if we avoid talking about the love, then we're also avoiding talking about the fear. We're missing the essence of from what attitude am I stepping into this particular engagement? And so I think we need, and I think this is the work of the moment, to become exquisitely explicit around this matters. Creating these kinds of spaces really matters. And it is foundational. It's not a nice to have. It's a foundational choice of how we are going to be together. And if we don't do this work, we're going to keep on reaping the consequences we don't want. Sorry. And Jeff, I will hand over to you for your thoughts.
Always come up with these gems, these beautiful things. There's, I think it's Amibelis here who brought up this thing around fear and curiosity. What informs our curiosity? Because one comes from a point of understanding that curiosity, first of all, is driven by respect.
Yeah.
Curiosity is driven by the fact that you want to know and learn. Not as we in South Africa say in Afrikaans, nieuwsgierig, which has come to take, which means you are very nosy. It is not driven by that. It's driven by the fact that you respect what you do not know and want to learn more of that. And if we could, as Robyn says, approach our work with that kind of curiosity, that curiosity that's informed by wanting to learn and to understand the other person. But the other side of our curiosity in terms of our intervention, most of the time it is informed by fear. Not fear of the other person. Fear of learning from the other person, lest I lose my power over the other person. That's the kind of fear. So we need to find that balance between these two approaches. And as it was said, should we learn to open ourselves up? Take in and learn from the other person? I think the way we work would improve a lot. And thank you very much, Robyn. Thank you very much, Jenna.
Yeah, if I can just add one quick last, Jenna-Lee. So
please go ahead. We have time.
Thank you. So, I'm super aware, and I often articulate, like, this is both the simplest work in the world and the hardest work in the world. It is the simplest work because there is not one human being. There is not actually one living creature for whom the conditions with which they are being treated doesn't matter, who doesn't recognize what it feels like to be with somebody who genuinely approaches with care, who sees, hears, and loves you. It is the ultimate experience of being loved. That's how we know that's how we receive being loved. When somebody listens to us, not to judge us, but to really hear us, that is an experience of being loved. So we all recognize it. And what brings me great sadness is that these spaces are created and people come into them, they're like, that was amazing. And it's followed with, that is the first time I've been listened to in that way, which is tragic. Okay. So we need to practice the ways of holding spaces of belonging for each other because we've lost the habit of it. It's not that it's unfamiliar. It is immensely human. It is the process of humanizing our spaces together. So it's easy because we recognize it and we love it and we want to be in it. It's incredibly hard because in order to facilitate that, we have to let go of our guardedness. We have to step out of fear. We have to stop controlling other people. And we have to release the control of the outcomes of what you're going to get. So we have to let down our guard and become vulnerable. And that is very, very hard for us as a society because, we have been hurt because the foundational way in which we're treating each other hurts. And in terms of the kind of, sorry, I've now gone on too long, but the conversation around how does stuff happen in the world and in the philanthropic and civil society space, this is a space that often hurts. And it's because we're not pausing for long enough to think, how is this being experienced? How is this process that we're using being experienced? Yeah, thank you, Jenna-Lee.
Thanks so much, Robyn, and thank you so much, Jeff. So just to finish off, I've put the WhatsApp group link in the chat. So we would love you to join us there. We're having regular dialogues. The next dialogue that we're having is around the national dialogue and using social media for the national dialogue, which is very, very exciting. And we've got a great, talented team working on that. So please join us there. And then I've also put a handout, just example of some of this work. So you can download the handout if you are interested. And finally, I wanted to say thank you so much to Robyn and Jeff. It's been a great privilege to speak with you here today. And I look forward to continuing this conversation. And thank you for everyone who's attended. Everyone that's doing such incredible work, for being here today and for sharing your thoughts in the chat. It's been really wonderful to spend this time with you. And please reach out if you have any questions or if you want to continue this conversation in any way. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. That was really